what tips would you recommend for women?
So today we're going to talk about how to have better periods
Mhm.
without the use of hormonal birth control. And a lot of that is about supporting the body generally to support healthy periods, because a healthy menstrual cycle is an expression of general health. This is something I talk about in my book, Period Repair Manual. We talked about this a little bit in our other episode together, and how it is possible for most women to have close to symptomless periods, which goes against the narrative that periods are somehow inherently, painful or difficult. In my 25, almost 30 years experience with patients, I have just found that for almost everyone, there are in some cases, very simple ways to feel better. So what we could do perhaps is just talk through some of the most common menstruation or period symptoms, and just some tips, some ideas that might help women troubleshoot those.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so we'll start with the most common situation, which is either a lack of periods or irregular periods, because as people know, a healthy natural menstrual cycle should arrive approximately every month. It doesn't have to be exactly 28 days. That's a myth. Most women don't have a clockwork 28-day cycle. There's a range for an adult woman, anywhere from about a period coming every 21 days to every 35 days is normal, and it can sort of move around within that from month to month. And just a reminder, as we talked about in our other podcast, pill bleeds, what I call pill bleeds or birth control induced bleeds, are not menstrual cycles. So there's actually no medical reason to bleed monthly on hormonal birth control. So what we're talking about today is, having what a natural menstrual cycle should be like. And so if it's not coming regularly, then, as I talk about in all my books, the first step, it is important to speak to the doctor and try to rule out for example, some of the less common explanations for a lack of periods. So the periods, and I list some of those reasons in my book. I provide a list of questions for the doctor to try to work through some of the possibilities. But at the end of the day, for a lot of women, especially young women, there's two kind of common reasons for irregular periods or lack of periods. And one is under eating. So not eating enough is a surefire way to lose a period. So once some of the other explanations have been ruled out, then, and there's a few signs and symptoms women and doctors can look at to identify that the problem is under eating, and then the solution is just to eat more calories, or in some cases more carbohydrates, because a low carb diet in some women can also shut down periods. So that's the one common reason for irregular periods. Another common reason is something called polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS, which is super common, affects at least 1 in 10 women, possibly more, and it's becoming more common. And I've dedicated almost a whole chapter in my book, Period Repair Manual, to polycystic ovary syndrome and all the different signs and symptoms, which include weight gain, facial hair, irregular periods. And there's some different tips for improving that. There's a supplement called inositol. I can provide you with a citation for that. That's one of the more evidence-based supplements that's out there. It can help to regulate periods and relieve some of the symptoms associated with PCOS. And there's various other medications and diet changes and supplements that can help as well. Should we move on to some of the other common symptoms? Troubleshooting. Yeah. So that's.
Go ahead. You mentioned how to have periods without hormonal birth control. Would you like to talk something more about that?
Well, just to state again that the bleed that is induced on combined methods of hormonal birth control, the estrogen methods, those are not menstrual cycles. They're just induced. The medication has just induced a bleed, and there's actually no reason to do that monthly. So if someone, just to give the scenario, if someone wasn't having periods or was having irregular periods and then went on the pill to, in air quotes, regulate the period, it hasn't actually done that. It's masked it. It's created, a monthly bleed, which kind of looks like a menstrual cycle, but it's not. And one of the biggest problems with that approach is that it masks the underlying problem. So the underlying reason for the lack of periods will not have been addressed and will likely not go away. And so then this is something a lot of my patients have discovered, is they might have, got on the pill 10 years before they see me to regulate their period, and then had tried coming off it and their period's still irregular, or still missing, which is no surprise. And so then finally they have an opportunity to try to investigate and try to figure out what's going on with their actual hormonal system.
So
because a regular menstrual cycle is an expression of health. So this is recognized across all disciplines. In 2016, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists released a pretty radical statement saying that the menstrual cycle is a vital sign, which means that, that young women should be, and their doctors should be looking to see that they are having a fairly regular natural menstrual cycle, because that's a sign that everything is going well, not only with their reproductive system, but with their health generally. So that was really great when they released that statement. I talk about that in my book, Period Repair Manual, and just how pleased everyone in the natural medicine world was when we finally sort of got that official word that, yeah, natural menstrual cycles are a good thing.
do you recommend non-hormonal pills, or do you not recommend any pills when it comes to birth control at all?
Oh yeah, well, we can talk before we resume our survey of period problems. I can talk a little bit about other methods of avoiding pregnancy.
Go ahead.
Which is, yeah, it can be quite helpful. And there's a whole chapter about that in Period Repair Manual. But at the moment, we have about 5 or 6 good methods that are non-hormonal. There are more coming. I'll just preface my listing of the methods to say there's a new male method coming, which is what they call a vaso-occlusive method, which is actually just undergone, I think, 2nd level clinical trials in Australia. So I love that Australian scientists are stepping up to the plate to try to bring this research to people, bring this new strategy, this new option, contraceptive options. It's kind of like a reversible vasectomy. So it's non-hormonal, it's for men, and it's potentially means all their female partners don't have to take birth control anymore. But so that's coming hopefully in the next few years. The current methods we have are condoms, which I'm a huge fan of, actually, a lot, especially for young people. I think condoms are great. And then a couple things with condoms: they have to fit properly, they have to be a good quality condom. And then I do in my work, so I think it's important for couples to have access, women to have access to emergency contraception in the unlikely event of a condom breakage, which is unlikely. And the emergency, the so-called morning after pill, is really just like the pill. It's the same medication that's in the pill. It works by preventing ovulation, except that you're taking it maybe never, or maybe only once every few years rather than every day. So from that perspective, I think that's better for women's health. And then some of the other methods, there are the intrauterine devices, or the IUDs. There's a non-hormonal one, which is copper. It basically just impairs sperm via copper ions. So that's another reasonable option. It can cause heavier flow, which is why some women can't take it, but they can't use it. And then there's a hormonal IUD, which is actually increasingly popular. And I would say it's, of all the types of hormonal birth control, it's one that is more friendly potentially to female biology, because it doesn't shut down the hormonal system the way pretty much all other hormonal methods do. So with the hormonal IUD, women get to have their own hormones, which is a plus, and they get to have the benefits of those hormones for bones and mood and cardiovascular system. But they also do have some of the medication, it's a medication called levonorgestrel that's released by the hormonal IUD. It does have some effects, so it can affect mood and breasts and other things. And then there's a few others. There's sort of modern versions of the diaphragm, or what's called a cervical cap. And then finally, popular amongst some groups of women and couples is what's called fertility awareness-based methods. So it's all the kind of modern ways of tracking ovulation, often with temperatures, and not guessing at, but actually determining the fertile window, and then either abstaining or using condoms or something during the fertile window. Because fun fact, men are fertile every day. Women are fertile really technically only 1 day per cycle per month, but it translates into about 6 or 7 days because sperm can live for 5 or 6 days. So you've got to sort of, factor that in, calculate that when you're. So this is becoming more popular. There's a couple of approved algorithms, or what they call femtech, that can help with this, and sort of women can understand their fertile window. So people can find that sort of information in the show notes. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that with us today.
Yeah.
Do you have more to add to it?
No, but I mean, those are the primary non-hormonal methods at the moment. And like I said, everyone's hoping for, it's 2025. I mean, I think scientists are on the case working on other strategies. The best one is probably the one I mentioned at the top, which is essentially a reversible vasectomy, which I personally think is going to be a game changer for society, for couples, for women, just again to shift the burden of birth control away, in part away from women.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So should we continue our just survey of, if people are wondering, sort of survey of common period problems and just a few tips? So yeah, we talked about irregular periods or absent periods. That's a very common one. I mean, the next thing a lot of women struggle with is painful periods, painful and or heavy periods. And so I'll just say periods really shouldn't be painful. Through my lens, a healthy menstrual cycle is relatively painless. And also in terms of heaviness, women shouldn't lose more than about 80 milliliters of menstrual fluid over all the days of bleeding. So that's about equivalent to about 5 tablespoons, or the contents of 1 egg over all the days. So of course, some women lose a lot more blood than that. And that, if they're listening to this and thinking what I'm describing sounds very low, then they, maybe should talk with their doctor, because it's not normal to, bleed heavily. And there are different strategies that I talk about in my books and on my podcast about how to sort of troubleshoot heavy periods. There's different explanations. For example, just having another hormonal problem, the common situation of underactive thyroid, or what's called hypothyroidism, can make periods heavier. So that's an example of, if that's the explanation, then you want to treat the thyroid hormone, and that will lighten flow. So that's just one possibility. I mean, I talk about a couple of other things to try. Is I have certainly found over the decades, and talked to lots of other doctors who have found the same thing, that for some women, cow's dairy, especially if they have a dairy sensitivity, can make periods heavier. And some of that's to do with a part of the immune system that releases histamine can sort of react to dairy, and that can play a role in heavier flow. And then I'll just give a little plug for the simple nutrient zinc. People can buy zinc supplements for next to no money at all. There was a clinical trial using zinc in young women to relieve period pain, and they found it to be as effective as the pill, which is great news, because zinc is inexpensive and also doesn't shut down the hormonal system.
Thank you for being here today. I'm really happy that you tuned in to Vision Pros Live. I'm looking forward to seeing your reactions as these episodes continue to move forward. This is going to get more and more fun. We'll have more and more engagement as well. We'll invite people to participate in the show. And thank you for giving us your time and attention. Have an excellent time building out your vision and becoming a Vision Pro yourself.